Thank you, Kartik, for what I'm sure was a great introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm very pleased to be speaking at ETHOnline this year. My presentation is titled "The Year in Ethereum: Two Underrated Developments." Let's jump in. So to start off, hi, I'm Josh. I work for the Ethereum Foundation, and I've worked in the Ethereum space for a while now. Previously, I founded ETH Global, the company putting on this conference, and also a company called L4. If you want to follow me, I tweet at the address you see on your screen, and you can also find my writing at stark.mirror.xyz. So each year, myself and my friend and colleague, Evan Van Ness, write this blog post called The Year in Ethereum. We've been doing it since 2018. And this year, I've been thinking about what's going to be in the 2021 edition. And I want to kind of share some of my thinking about this. And in particular, what I want to talk about are two big developments and two underrated things about them. So as we'll see in a second, some of the things that happened this year are very obvious. But I want to kind of dig into what it might be not obvious about them, the things that might be underrated or not appreciated. And I want to try and convince you that these things really matter as much as anything else that you see in your Twitter newsfeed. So let's jump into it. Number one, the year of the NFT. I'm sure this is a surprise to everyone watching this, that I rate this as an important development this year. This is a pretty amazing graph, right? On the far left here, we have the kind of a brief heyday of CryptoKitties, which was a project in Q4 2017. Since then, not a lot of interest in NFTs, at least in terms of the number of active people buying and selling them on Ethereum, or the market value of what was being traded. A year ago today, it wasn't much different than it had been for the preceding 2 years. A little bit of activity, but I mean, just comparing with the recent peaks, it's really been an astonishing story of growth in terms of users and the value of the assets being traded. Now, of course, NFTs are not just on Ethereum, but Ethereum does command most of the market share, at least in terms of the value of the assets and the amount of money changing hands. And NFTs, of course, also expanded, pretty substantially into other categories as well. There's a game called Axie Infinity built by a developer in Vietnam, and when you kind of rank the value of their assets that make up the Axie Infinity protocol, this compares to some of the largest gaming companies in the world. And the last graph I want to share here is just the comparison of the NFT search interest for cryptocurrency. It's incredible to think. I mean, imagine telling someone in 2015 that in a few years, an application that will be built on Ethereum, a project that no one believed would ever ship, and even if it did, that it would ever work, would have a higher amount of search interest than the entire category of cryptocurrency. It's a pretty astonishing change, and it should make us humble about what might happen over the next 5 years or even beyond. Now, if you ask someone what an NFT is, they're probably going to say one of these things today. You have profile pictures, you have art, you have ENS names, you have game items, you have blog posts or crowdfunding on Mirror. There's a pretty wide variety. But remember that NFTs are just things that conform to a standard. You can attach any kind of digital file or asset or anything to an NFT token. And we're really only beginning to explore what that might look like. The other component of the story this year is the amount of mainstream interest from celebrities and big brands and institutions like Christie's. It's exciting and validating to have something that once was such a small niche thing as a CryptoPunk on display in Christie's, on Jay-Z's profile picture in Times Square. It's pretty incredible, right? It's all fine. What I'll say about this is, celebrity interest and interest in big brands, it comes with the cycle. We also saw this, in different ways in previous cycles, where crypto is cool when the numbers go up and not cool when the numbers go down. So while it's validating to have a lot of celebrity interest or whatever, it's not the most important thing. It's not the thing I think that really matters, or that when we look back in 10 years, we'll say really mattered. So what does matter? Here's the thing that I think is underrated about all of this. The most important thing to me about the NFT boom over the last year is this: a new kind of person can now make a living on Ethereum. By make a living, I mean, make money, support themselves, build a life, build a career out of. That's incredibly exciting. So what do I mean by this? One way of telling the story of crypto is through the expanding circle of people who can make a living from it. From 2010 and 2013, if you were making a living on crypto, it probably meant you were an investor. You bought Bitcoin, the price went up, you held, good for you. You made a living and maybe much more than that. From 2014 to 2017, in this kind of next era, you have not just investors, but developers and also people that work for crypto companies. So early companies like Coinbase are coming online. They're hiring people. Individual developers are launching altcoins or other layer 1 protocols. We're seeing the first ICOs like Ethereum. It's another way to make a living, and maybe much more for some of the people on this list. From 2018 to 2020, things don't change all that much. The details change, right? If you're an investor, you have new investment products, you have new ways of making money as DeFi comes online and so forth. If you're a developer, you have new kinds of applications that you can build and make money from. And there's lots more crypto companies coming online and a greater variety. But it's still like you need to be one of these types of people in order to make a living from Ethereum. But this year, all that changed. This year, now for the first time, people who are creatives, people who are artists, musicians, writers, and also gamers can make a living on Ethereum. That's an incredible 0 to 1 moment that happened this year and is not going to stop happening anytime soon. Now, to earn a living using Ethereum, you don't need pre-existing capital to invest, which a lot, or even I would say most people in the world do not have. You don't need to be technical, which most people in the world are not. You don't need to be into finance or investing or understand what a derivative is, again, because most people don't. And you don't have to work for a crypto startup because most people can't or won't or don't have access to the opportunity. All you need to make a living on Ethereum now are 3 things. You need to create something that has a digital form. You need to build a community of people who value what you create, and you need to use Ethereum. That formula gives access to, making a living, to earn income, to a huge proportion of people that did not have it previously. And that to me is the most exciting thing about the NFT boom of this year. And remember, this is not going to stop. NFTs are a blank canvas, and we've barely explored that canvas. If we can imagine, a hypothetical graph of, everything you can do with NFTs, it might look like this, the space of all possible NFTs. We've really only scratched the surface, the very kind of first smallest corner of what can be done here. At a certain point, NFTs stop being an area of technical innovation and become one of social innovation. What do people value? What can they coordinate around? And that design space is absolutely huge. And it's only going to continue to expand as more and more people get into this, more and more people realize that they can earn an income from it. So that's the thing that I think really matters about NFTs this year. So that's the first theme. Let's move on to the second. The year Ethereum scaled. And this is not the year that Ethereum finished scaling, but I think it is the year that it really earnestly began to happen for the end user's perspective. In 2018, I wrote a blog post called Making Sense of Ethereum's Layer 2 Scaling Solutions. And at the beginning of that blog post, right at the top, I wrote the following. For Ethereum, 2018 is the year of infrastructure. This was going to be the year when early adoption will test the limits of the network, renewing focus on technologies built to scale the network. Now, I didn't include a hard prediction in that because I didn't want to be held accountable to it. But I do remember that I was very optimistic when I wrote this, that within a year, maybe 2, state channels and Plasma would be live and being used to scale the world of applications on Ethereum. State Channels is live, but it's got a niche interest or kind of a niche use case. And Plasma, as we'll see, kind of evolved into something else. A few years went by, not quite this many, but let's call it around 3. And here we are. Things are really happening. More than $3 billion is locked into layer 2 protocols where users are using those assets in a way that is performant, but still secured by the core Ethereum protocol security layer. Just to collect a few examples, there's lots of layer 2 solutions out there, but a few things that happened this year alone. Arbitrum has been on mainnet for a while, but it opened up to everybody in August. Optimism is on mainnet since August, but it's still permissioned. ZK Sync has been on testnet since May 31, and StarkX is used by a bunch of different projects, including DYDX, ImmutableX, SoRare, all of which went live on mainnet this year, and Diversify, which went live last year. There's a lot more to learn about layer 2 protocols and all the various projects that are out there right now. I do recommend l2beat.com as an incredible resource to learn about them. So the other thing I wrote in this blog post is that something that held up pretty well, I think, that we should expect that there will be new and unexpected layer 2 protocols that improve on the existing models we have today or make new trade-offs between the different competing interests. And this turned out to be right on. If we look at all of the projects listed on l2beat.com, basically everything on this list, the technology didn't exist 3 years ago. Plasma kind of, did not turn out because there were real limitations to that approach, but it spawned the world of rollups, which turned out to actually work. And so if we remove the 2 Plasma projects from this list, everything you see here did not exist. The technology did not exist when I wrote that blog post. It's a real testament to both the strategy of the Ethereum community of having a programmable layer that can be the basis for many different types of scaling solutions, and also the incredible community of people who have been researching and innovating and taking risks and building companies and building these protocols over only a few short years. So that's all obvious. It's all great. It's very exciting. What's underrated about it? What I think is underrated about this is that as these projects launch and we gain experience from them in production, the long-term architecture of the greater Ethereum ecosystem is coming into clearer view. And it's like we've kind of been on this journey and we reached the top of a hill, and now we can see more clearly where we're going. The journey is not over, but now we have a vantage point where the landscape is a lot more clear, a lot more obvious to us. So I think the future looks like this. The future is modular with Ethereum at the core. And I want to kind of run through what that modular future might look like. And I should first caveat that this is not an official roadmap of any kind. This is not the official view of the Ethereum Foundation. This is my synthesis and summary of what I'm seeing in the ecosystem, and also my adaptation of what I've learned from others writing and research. 2 particular sources I should mention are, of course, the Rollup-Centric Ethereum Roadmap blog post from last year by Vitalik, and also more recently, a whole bunch of blog posts from a writer named ETHOnline on Twitter, who's a pseudonymous writer who's really produced some excellent stuff that has helped me see the future more clearly and helped many others as well. So both great contributions from community members right here. I strongly recommend you read both of them. Special thanks to ETHOnline also for giving us some feedback on this presentation. I really appreciate your time and what you've done for the community. So let's talk about what the modular future looks like. And let's begin with a simple model of Ethereum. And I want to kind of run through the basics that makes this all possible and why we end up where we think we're going to end up. Ethereum has 2 basic functions. It executes things and it secures things. It has an execution function and a security function that are very intertwined, but we can distinguish between them. The execution function is what processes your transaction, right? Ethereum runs smart contracts. The Ethereum virtual machine, or the EVM, takes transactions, updates state. Great. This is the layer that apps and users interact with. If you send a transaction, it's handled by execution. The other part of Ethereum is the security layer, or the security function. Ethereum, of course, maintains consensus over the state of the EVM, and proof of work and proof of stake ensure that there's an extremely high cost to trying to mess with that state. So you can be, quite assured that once your transaction is finalized, it's going to stay that way. Apps and users might not interact with this layer in a direct sense, but without this layer, of course, there's not much point to the execution layer because it wouldn't be secure. So here's our little, box representing Ethereum, and here it is performing these two functions, execution and security. The problem is this simple model doesn't scale. As we've learned, we want execution to be fast and cheap because it needs to scale to the demands of the 8 billion humans who are eventually going to want to use it. But there's a trade-off. If we try and make Ethereum fast and cheap in a kind of naive way, it becomes less secure. And without that security, we just can't compromise on it. Otherwise, the execution layer is no better than a spreadsheet or a database held by some group of people who we don't necessarily trust. For Ethereum to be trustless, decentralized, all these things, it needs to be secure. So what's the solution? The outline of the solution we've known for a long time, which is that we need to modularize. We need to have kind of separate environments that handle different parts of this need. And this is the insight behind the layer 2 protocols I talk about in that blog post from 3 years ago. And it's the kind of basic function of rollups. And really what I'll be talking about here today is rollups because they are the dominant scaling solution that are now being implemented and used. So the basic idea is this. We have Ethereum at the bottom, and we have this other environment that is doing execution. Now, Ethereum still does execution in the sense that, of course, the EVM still exists, but where the app and the user, like what they're interacting with, where all the action's happening, it's happening on this other environment. And so we're going to kind of, hide this box just for simplicity's sake. So the idea is we create these modular components that can still preserve the security guarantees we care about. How is this possible? It works like this in a simple way. Here's the execution layer. And let's imagine that you want to use Uniswap. And so in this case, Uniswap is going to run inside this layer 2, this rollup. And instead of just doing everything on main chain, we're just going to store some data on Ethereum mainnet. We're going to take the information about the trades you're making, the outcomes of those trades, the state updates and so forth. We're going to roll it up and kind of compress the data and put it onto Ethereum mainnet. The data we're putting there has two functions. There's kind of two components to it. One on the left is data that proves the validity of the transactions, right? A kind of a receipt that shows somebody or can be shown to somebody to say like, no, the transactions that happened off of Ethereum, they're valid transactions. They followed the right rules for updating state. And then there's also just the raw transaction data itself of these state updates and what changes were made. So let's talk about the thing on the left, because this is at the core of the security that is being inherited here. The reason that layer 2 can be secure is because of what's happening here. These proofs of your transactions are what lets these transactions inherit security from Ethereum. And there's two ways that works. One way is the optimistic way. Optimistic rollups function as follows. You are always able to prove later that your transaction is valid. You don't run the proof every time we record state to the Ethereum mainnet, but we preserve the option of doing so later. And so if there were a problem, a challenge, or something went wrong, you're always able to go back to that data, produce a proof and say, nope, I'm fine. I can show you that, this transaction actually did happen, that it followed all the rules. So, that money that Bob sent to Alice does actually belong to Alice now. The other way to do it is a ZK rollup. And the very simple description here is that we're using special ZK cryptography, Moon math, as it's sometimes called, to create a proof that transaction was valid. And this is still scalable or saving us time because this proof is much, much smaller and cheaper than just doing the whole thing on Ethereum in the first place. So we're still getting scalability gains from this. So that's the proof side of the equation. The other part of this is the raw transaction data. So what's going on there? We need this for a few different reasons. Excuse my slides. The raw transaction data has to be stored and available somewhere for a few different reasons. Users need to know what data is in the block, right? If you are using Uniswap on layer 2, you need to be able to go check somewhere, what was the update? What was the outcome of my trade? Where is this money now? You need the, the information about what has been happening to be available somewhere, and you need to be able to rely on that. The other nodes that might participate in the rollup network to produce the rollup blocks also need that data to produce their own blocks. And optimistic rollups need the data in order to produce the fraud proofs that would actually secure your transaction. This brings us to the third function of blockchain infrastructure. We've talked so far about execution and security, but we also need data availability. And data availability is basically the function or the layer that stores transaction data. And it's needed for all these reasons that I already talked about. For security, to enable decentralized rollups where there are kind of multiple entities that produce blocks, and also just for users to know what's going on. We didn't have to kind of talk about this explicitly before, because in this simple version of Ethereum, Ethereum already provides for the kind of data availability that's needed, because full nodes store this information, so it's able to be checked by wallets, by block explorers, so users can get access to it, and so that other nodes can produce blocks. But once we're in this environment of having modular components, we need data availability that scales a bit further, and so there are some new requirements. So this is the third thing that our blockchain infrastructure needs to provide. So 3 things: execution, security, data availability, or ESD for short. Now, as we kind of get here, this is really kind of giving us a better picture now of what the future might look like and what the different components of a modular blockchain world will look like. Now, of course, we have this kind of version of, here's what Ethereum does and here's what layer 2 does, et cetera. But we can also just think of it more abstractly. I mean, forget Ethereum for a second, forget layer 2, forget everything you know. These are the 3 things that users need to have, useful blockchain infrastructure. They need a security layer, they need an execution layer, and they need data availability. And there's different ways that we could, build an infrastructure around these things to enable them all to work in concert. And when we think about what the future looks like, we can think about, well, what projects or technologies are best placed to be the most successful solution for the different components of this world. So let's talk about that. A security layer, we probably don't need too many of these. And the reason is that, well, it's actually better and more secure to have a small number of security layers that have a lot of pooled security instead of a whole bunch of separate security layers that are kind of carving up the available security in terms of, assets and economic security. So right now, really only Ethereum and Bitcoin could play this role, because they are just, orders of magnitude more secure than any other layer 1 blockchain. And Bitcoin can't do this stuff. Bitcoin just cannot run the ZK proofs needed for ZK rollups. It just cannot run the contracts needed for optimistic rollups. And so it just can't provide this function, but Ethereum can. So probably the security layer for the world's blockchain infrastructure is going to be Ethereum. Execution layers, we can have lots of those. There might even, what we're seeing in the market now is there's lots of competition between different projects as they compete on, how they use the security of Ethereum, whether they use it at all, the execution environments, the technology available to developers, all sorts of things might allow these to compete with each other. And we are seeing that in the market now. Now, some of these will be layer 2s, meaning that they will actually, use the security of Ethereum as a rollup, and others might stay separate or independent for, whatever reason. But they're still serving a purpose for the broader ecosystem to enable users to, use these applications. And now we kind of fill in some of these names. This is what we see today. There's a whole bunch of layer 2 projects that are using Ethereum for security. And then we also have projects that might not use it and are either side chains or separate L1s or something else. There's still bridges between all these things, so you can move assets onto them, but they're not using the security of it. So here's, what the kind of execution environment landscape looks like today, and it could grow to include many more projects or consolidate in some way in the future. We don't know what that looks like because we haven't got there yet. Then, of course, there's data availability, and here too we'll probably have some competition. One of those data availability layers will likely be Ethereum. Eventually, the plan is to add to Ethereum data shards that will enable a really large amount of data availability that is secured by Ethereum to be used by rollups and others. And then there will probably also be other data availability layers that are separate and able to be used by anyone. And there already are some of these on the market right now. And so then we'll have this, right? We'll have some of these projects that are layer 2 projects. We'll use data availability on Ethereum. Others will use a separate solution. Some might even let users choose which provider they want to use or change between them as needed by what the user wants or what the application needs. And maybe someday, these separate layer 1 execution environments might decide to use Ethereum as a security layer. It is, if it continues to be far more secure than their own security they're able to provide, then it might make sense to specialize on being an execution layer and leave the cryptoeconomic security piece to Ethereum and make it easier for your users to, benefit from that and all that comes with it. So this is, what, Link might see, that this is what's in the valley ahead of us. Or is at least one potential version of the future. And at least for me, thinking about this and seeing projects actually launch and what they're actually doing and what solutions they're actually using makes this picture a lot more clear. It kind of gives us an idea of what the kind of basic components are that the world's blockchain infrastructure needs to provide and how all these projects might relate. And I think this will become increasingly clear to more of the community and more of the market. And projects will start to see themselves as fitting into a certain piece of this landscape. Right now, there's just all these different blockchains, layer 1, side chains, L2, whatever. And I think most people don't really understand how they interact. They're all just kind of separate little islands that make different claims and have different relationships, but no one can really make sense of how it all fits together. And I think something like this is becoming more clear and will make more sense. So, this is the beginning of, what might be considered the greater Ethereum ecosystem of, how these different protocols will interoperate, how they will support each other, how they will collaborate as, one large community as opposed to many separate communities. So that's what I think is the underrated thing about these rollouts. Not only is progress happening, but it's progress that lets us see further into the future than we could before. I want to remind you, of course, this is not an official roadmap. This is not the official view of the Ethereum Foundation. This is my synthesis and summary of mostly other people's ideas, predictions, and guesswork. So take it seriously, but perhaps not literally. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed being here today, giving this talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the